So the talk today, when Mike and I thought about putting this talk together, we spend a lot of time speaking with folks about their careers. A lot of folks are very good at what they do and their profession, and they might be great pen testers or great risk managers. But a lot of times what happens is that in the throes of your job, you stop thinking about yourself. You stop thinking about what's the future. And I think a lot of times those things kind of weigh on your satisfaction. People get into ruts. And I think that when it comes down to it, you really have to start thinking about your career as if you were running your own company. Because at the end of times, you are the biggest money-making vehicle that you have. It's bigger than any investment. It's bigger than the stock market, real estate, obviously real estate. But I mean,
especially in Vegas.
There you go. But I mean, it's the one investment that you really control. And I think that if people took a more business-focused approach to managing their careers, satisfaction would increase, compensation would increase, and you would probably get to where you want to go a lot quicker.
Michael Gerber, the famous author of a book called The E-Myth, writes a lot about entrepreneurship. And says that one of the biggest problems for entrepreneurs, and both Lee and I are entrepreneurs, so we live this daily. One of the biggest problems that most entrepreneurs face is getting stuck working in their business too much and not working on their business enough. So, if you're a pen tester, you spend all your time doing pen tests, and you don't spend your time doing sales, doing marketing, doing finance, doing operations, because it's so, we all do our thing. And if that's a problem for entrepreneurs who really, are aware that a business has all that kind of an issue, it's even more of a problem for us, as practitioners. Most of us work in our jobs almost exclusively. How often do you go to work and think, I'm not going to do my tasks today, I need to work on my career? You don't. You go do your thing for however much time, and then you come home and you're done. But that becomes a problem because that becomes, you don't progress over the course of 30 or 40 years. And frankly, that was something we could have done a long time ago. But security is really changing. And we've said it for the last couple of years wherever we've talked. Our industry's undergoing a sea change, partially because the economy is bad, but also partially because we're growing up. It's changed a whole lot in the last few years, and we see the job of the future, the next 5 years, changing even more than it's changed to this point.
And I think the most important thing about the future is that time remains a constant in everybody's career, and the future will eventually get here. So the time to start planning for the future is really now. And if you start looking at some components, we're not in our parents' workforce. Companies are not making the investments necessary in their people. So investing in building your careers is something that is your responsibility. And if you look around the people in the room, everybody wants the same thing. How many people would aspire to be either a chief security architect or a chief information security officer in this room? How many would aspire to just be an entrepreneur of some sort? So basically, everybody wants, if you look around, we all want the same thing. So think about who you're competing with. You're competing with everybody else in the room, just like in business. In business, the product vendors compete, the services vendors compete, the car manufacturers compete. So when you start thinking about it, is that if the companies aren't going to care about how you get there, it really becomes your responsibility and your undertaking.
And the differentiators are going away. When I got I said this on a podcast I was on yesterday. When I got my CISSP, I was CISSP number 11,000 or something. It was a really low number. And nobody really had one. So CISSP was a differentiator. There's 67,000 CISSPs at this point.
Is everybody feeling special now?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Lee actually brought up we're going to change this slide at some point to be a deli counter with those little ticket number things. You're number 67,000.
Now serving.
Yeah, now serving number 67,000. How does, there's no college football ranking system that says this person's number 2 and this person's number 67,000. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It's the price of admission. It's a signal of your interest in the industry and of a moderately baseline level of competence. It means you read a book. That's not a bad thing, but it's not a differentiator.
It's not going to help get you where you want to go alone. It's going to be a component, but it's not going to be the only thing. And when in the past it was enough, now it's just a ticket to the party.
And it's like, I mean, our industry is especially prone to this. It's like what you have to do is move to the point where you're managing your career as a business. We have a lot of friends who are really great practitioners, and they go out and start a business. You're a brilliant researcher. Okay, now I'm in business for myself. Well, most of those people just end up as contractors. They're not really in business, they're a contractor. If you're in business, you think like a CEO.
Does anybody have any impressions what the main function of a CEO's role is in business? Harris? Okay, that's good. Vision?
Go for it. Increase profit. I like profit.
That's good. We're all fans of profit.
Yeah.
But to me, the way I've always been told that, I think all those are good answers. But what I always see is that the CEO's main job in a company is to make decisions, and to make decisions with the best interest in the company in mind. And when you start thinking about, when you start thinking about yourself as the CEO of your career. So just to draw some parallels is that where the CEO is making some decisions about the company and the company's well-being, in your own career, you're going to make your decisions about yourself and what your own personal well-being is. The great thing about decisions, and when you own those decisions, is that you get to reap the rewards, and you also get to suffer the consequences.
You get the exorbitant CEO pay for your own business. You get 100% of the profits.
And the thing is this, the CEO of companies accountable to everybody. They're accountable to their employees, their shareholders, their board of directors, their customers. When you're the CEO of your own company, you're accountable to your family. You're accountable to yourself. You're accountable to your employer. And to some extent, you're accountable to your peers in the industry. And the other thing is this, is that the CEO every day, they're basically auditioning for their job, auditioning to keep their job. And when you run your own business, you're always auditioning for your next position. Because every day you're trying out, every day somebody is judging you, and you have to think about that anybody who you can interact with can ultimately change the course of your life.
I got a question for you guys. You're starting a business today. You've just been nominated yourself CEO of You Inc. What's the first thing you're going to do? Go. Get a plan. First thing you do is you write a business plan. Because if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. And it's amazing. All good businesses start with a plan. Now, they don't necessarily start with a 55-page formal business justification written up in, awesome, beautifully typed font and looking like the kind of thing that you send to a bank. But everybody has a plan.
Napkin.
Yeah, napkin.
Napkin's good.
Some of my best business ideas have been on the back of a napkin. But you have to know what business you're in. It's the first thing. What do you provide to your customers? What market is there for you? What's out there? What kind of stuff are you going to see? Who's your competition? What's going to keep you from being successful? What's the goal? And ultimately, what's the exit strategy? If you're starting a business today, you have to decide, am I building this business to still be profitable 40 years from now? Or am I building this business to be a quick business that's probably going to last 3 or 4 years? You can make that decision.
I mean,
And
when you look at businesses, some companies either, they go public, they get acquired, or some businesses are run as lifestyle businesses. So you have to think about it, how long do I want to be working? How much is my lifestyle a factor in making business decisions? So you start thinking about all these different components just as if you were running a company.
how many of you guys have a written plan for your life and career, your own personal business? Hands high. Yeah, that's about right. Actually, that's almost exactly right. That's what we saw. We did a big survey year and a half ago now, and that's what our industry said. And it's amazing. A few of you guys near the back of the room, put your hands up. You're all very much more likely better off than the rest of the room. You make more money, you're probably a more senior person, and you're probably happier with your job. Blows my mind. This one thing. Now, I'm not making the mistake that correlation implies causality. I'm not saying if you write a plan, you're suddenly going to be better off. But for some reason, the people who plan are better off. Don't know why, but I have a hunch that if you know where you're going, you end up getting there more often. If you know that, hey, I'd be really happy if I had a job where I didn't have to travel. If you thought that out, you can seek that out. If you don't think it out, you don't get there. Ultimately, you need to, if you really want to run your career as a business, you need to make a plan. You need to tie where you're going to be 10 years from now to what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do next week? And ultimately, this plan is not, actually, I'm going to tangent for a second. Lee always quotes Mike Tyson. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? I'm not saying you should write a plan and stick to it. I'm not saying you're going to write a plan and you're going to do everything on there and everything's going to be perfect. Because I've never seen someone say, my life goal is to go through a bankruptcy next year. My life goal is to get foreclosed on. And we know how, watch the news. None of those people planned for that. It happens. But a plan gives you focus and a reference point with which to navigate the decisions you're going to make.
So think about when you're building your career plan, right? Think about what's important. So I think that we all had to share our hands. We all thought of maybe what our ultimate career goals are. That's a great place to start when you're building a plan. Think about the destination that you want to go towards. And then you have to start getting honest with yourself. You have to really take a good look in the mirror and understand what talents you have, what skills you currently have. What do other people think of your talents? What do other people think of your skills? And then you have to take a look and you say, okay, let's do a gap assessment. If I want to reach my goal, and that goal requires skills A through Z, and I have skills A, C, E, F, and G, I'm going to have to find a way to acquire those missing skills so I could be qualified for my long-term career goal. And then also you got to think about your competition because they're thinking the same exact thing. The idea is that your career has an ultimate destination, but there are destinations along the way and making the right decisions about which jobs you take, which type of companies that you work in. There should be a strategy towards that. There should be a method to that madness so it will ultimately lead you where you want to go. And there's so many different directions that you can take in information security that it's generally very easy to get lost. It's very easy to take a position where you don't pick up any skills, but you get a new color golf shirt. You think about it. Think about how many times you've taken a job and then you found out the job that you've taken is basically the same job that you left. And it's just that you've maybe gotten a little bit more money. Maybe you've gotten a little bit of different title or different bonus plan. But at the end of the day, you're doing the same thing. You're staying stagnant in your careers. So the concept behind is that you have to continue towards, you got to keep those long-term career goals in mind, and you have to build a strategy to continue to invest in yourself to build those skills in order to get them.
All right, you got a plan. Next step, once you got a plan, is to build an organization. Standard company has a standard org chart. CEO in the middle, board of directors, and then functions, operations, general counsel, HR, product development, sales, marketing, finance, R&D, future investment. Same thing works for you. Same thing in career management that it is in business management. You have all the same functions. You have an ethical code. You have your own legal things that you have to deal with. We all have to do taxes every year. We all have to do, all that kind of stuff. You have your skills, your product. The product in your business is you. You want to develop the product, you develop yourself, you develop your skills. Then you have to sell yourself. You have to market yourself. You have to deal with money. And you have to deal with investment, research and development, new stuff.
So everybody in the room who thinks to themselves in their cubicle or in their office, they say, you know what, if I ran the company, I'd do it better. This is your chance to run your company. You all have the power to run your own business, and you control the product. You don't have to worry if the product doesn't have the right features, because you can fix them. You don't have to worry if the product works. Just look in the mirror. So all these components here is that you have the ability to take your career into your own hands, but it takes work. And I think that everybody's career, I think that the most important thing when you start thinking about your career is the foundation that you're going to build your career upon. And a lot of times, to me, that foundation in business is ethics. Is that, and does anybody have an own definition of business ethics or how they define it? Okay.
Don't do anything you don't want to see in the
Stay
newspaper
away
tomorrow.
from the New York Times. Next. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
I
good.
like that one.
I think that those are all, real good things. Is that, I think that when it comes down to it, you really have to understand who you are. And this is one of my favorite poems. I kind of got hold of this early in life. And it really talks about being honest with yourself. Has anybody ever seen this poem? Everybody? Is this new or like an evolution or? Okay. Anyhow, I think that the idea is this, is that you have to understand who you are, and you have to understand what you're willing to do and what you're capable of. And that comes from internal soul searching. But that foundation will be the foundation that can provide you the basis for all your decisions down the road in your business. You start thinking about your priorities. Anybody have a list of their personal priorities? Elements of it?
A little bit. One guy in the back of the room.
I'll tell you what my priorities are. It's probably easiest, right? My number one priority is my family. Number one thing. More important than anything in the world. Then the second thing would be providing for my family. So that might be money. Then there are other things. Health. I mean, a lot of people are driven by how they feel. I'm a little heavy. It's not that big of a deal for me right now. It might get bigger later on. But you start thinking about all these different things about what's important to you. And you start laying those things out and start basing your decisions upon those tenets, upon that foundation.
And what you ultimately have to do is you have to bring everything into alignment. The hardest challenge that I have in business is making sure that what we want to do as a company aligns with what we're actually doing. Who we want to be and where we want to go. And it comes back to the career plan, right? It comes back to the business plan. You set out a statement up front that says, this is what I'm going to do. This is who I'm going to be. This is how it's going to go. And especially in business, as a It's really easy to chase anything that comes along. Um, somebody comes along and offers you a deal that is not part of what you want to do. It's not part of what you want to build. It's not part of who you want to be. And you have to decide, is that deal worth taking to be misaligned, to be off the current path, to be taken aside? So you have to know your priorities, and you have to know what trade-offs you're willing to make and which ones you're not willing to make.
Well, a lot of times people have big goals, right? I mean, it's easy to have a big goal, but it's very hard to achieve the goal. The bigger the goal, the more work you have to put in. And the bigger the goal, the more people aspire to have that goal. I would tell you this is that, it's one of these items where when you look at it, the more you're willing to sacrifice and put into something, probably the more reward you're going to get. So when you start thinking about that in terms of your career, and you start thinking about what you're willing to do, is that if getting to where you want to go requires you to travel around the world, and it's important for you to be home to pick up your kids from school, it's probably not going to align. So you have to figure out what's important to you and align it that way, and be honest with what you're willing to put in, because generally, what is it? Garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you start thinking about your career in those ways, you have to then, by aligning the direction you want to head with what's important to you, you're more apt to get better satisfaction. You're more apt to accomplish a realistic career goal.
So we'll ask the question, what matters to you? And when we did our one of our recent surveys, we asked this in a different way. What would you be willing to give up money for? I'd be willing to take less money for what? And what would it be for you? More training? More time at Black Hat? More time at home? Less travel? More health care? More responsibility? What would it be for you?
I thought that the results of this were interesting, right? I mean, we got it was like 460 respondents. We did this over 2 months in the spring of this year. And the number one answer, you guys will see the chart, that 49% people, they said, I would give up money to save my ass. I thought that number would be bigger. I would give up salary to save my ass, generally speaking, but only 49%. So I thought that was a lot of confidence out there. But the only thing that was next was training and education. 47%, statistically almost a dead heat, that people said is that getting more skills, training, and education is almost equivalent to saving your ass.
We're an interesting industry like that.
And the other three, the next three things, between, were all real quality of life issues, right? I mean, basically work fewer hours, more vacation, which are to me, I think are the same thing. And the ability to telecommute, have some better, work-life balance. You think about it, though, is that when you start thinking about your career and salary, that people are driven by things that make them feel better, that get them smarter. But you have to identify what's important to you. That is your business. Each business has different priorities. You managing your career are going to have different priorities than your neighbor.
So once you've figured out priorities, it's time to talk about product development. It's time to talk about your skills. And this is where, we're going to sound like the standard career people. We're going to talk about skills and certifications and all that kind of stuff. But it goes beyond just talking about skills. If you think about it, like running a business. How many of you guys are on the product side of this industry, work for a vendor, or have worked for a vendor at some point? Okay, about 10, maybe a little more %. So product management, what do? What's a product manager do? Anyone? Right. They sit down and they figure out all the features of what a product needs. And it's not just, the bells and whistles. It's not just how the product is developed, but it's the whole product. It's how do we support our customers? How do we go to market? How do we sell this? It's the whole package. It's the same thing when it comes to you. It's not just a question of what certs do I need and what book do I need to read this year, and do I go to Black Hat or do I go to CanSec West? It's everything about you. It's not just your technical skill, it's your strategic skill. It's your understanding of the industry. It's your understanding of the way that you interact with your business. It's the quote-unquote soft skills, your relationships with people, your interaction with your customers. Pop quiz. Who's the customer of You Inc.? What? Yeah. One thing that I will always say about a business is if you think everybody's your customer, you don't have a customer. Who's your customer? Today, who's your customer? What? Sorry, I can't hear. No, you're not. Well, you probably are your own customer. Your employer is your customer. Your employer is your customer. If you have a job, think about it. The customer is the person that pays you for what you do. Right? If I run a consulting company, my customer is the person that signs a contract with me and pays me to consult for them. Your employer is your customer. How do you interact with them? What do you bring to them? Is part of your product mix. If you're thinking of this as product management. Also, what kind of product are you going to be? Are you going to be a very boring, I say boring, very, standard stock, I wear a suit every day product? Or are you going to show up to work with blue hair? Every product is different. And you see this if you look at products through the market. It's part of the brand identity. It's part of the product identity. And you have to make all of these decisions about your product. The nice thing about it is you can upgrade that at any time. And we'll talk more about that later when we get into R&D.
When you start thinking about your skill matrix, right? I mean, we all have very hard skills. We're good at technology. We understand risk management. We understand frameworks. But we start thinking about a skill matrix and start thinking about the skill matrix as not just your experience and your skills, but the ability to correlate those skills and then to communicate it to others that can make a difference. So it's the combination of understanding who you are, what you're doing, and your ability to then leverage these experiences to build a case to make it that your product is a great product. You have to build these cases. So when you start thinking about your career, start thinking about leveraging your experiences on top of each other. Because when you come down to it is that you eventually want to get to a point where to build these skills, you want to make sure you don't repeat. You want to make sure that your skills, the return on your investments are not diminishing. There's only so much that people will pay for certain skills.
So think about it for a second. Let's use an example from our industry. You're an antivirus company. You're Symantec. We all know that they don't have signatures for every virus. Why not? They could. You could hire 1,000 signature developers, and you could make a massive team, and you could spend a huge amount of money to make sure that you had all the signatures, or at least as close to all as statistically possible. But there's no point, because they couldn't possibly sell the product for enough. It wouldn't be enough of a competitive advantage to sell the product enough to justify the spend. Same thing in working on your strengths. You can only be so good at one thing before it stops mattering. Before it's, you can only be a great researcher to a certain point before being any better at it doesn't get you any more sales effectively.
Well, the other thing is this, is that as more and more people acquire the same skill, people talk a lot of times in sports, they'll talk about the value over an average player. So in other words, if the average center fielder, anybody like baseball? But if the average center fielder hits 275 and hits 10 home runs and drives in 60 runs, well, that's the average person. So to build that the next step, You're not thinking about, well, how much added value is if my center fielder hit 280, hit 15 home runs, and drove in 85 runs. So it's kind of like you start thinking yourself about what's the added incentive to get better? Is my time best spent getting better at something I'm already good at? Or is my time better spent focusing on things in areas that I'm deficient in and getting them to a point where they become skills, where I take a weakness and I drive it to become a skill? Because when you start thinking about when you apply for positions, what you're trying to do is to get a position that's going to accelerate your career development. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that is by proving to others that you have the additional skills necessary to make you a qualified candidate for that role. So spending that time building and developing weaknesses that matter to your evolution as an information security leader is extremely important.
And the ability to communicate that ultimately comes down to sales.
How many people have a sales component in their current role? You know, we all have sales components. You know, every day in our jobs, security professionals, whether you work internally for a company in a corporate security team, work externally as a consultant or a product vendor, you have to sell the concept of security. You're selling the importance of your job. You're selling the importance of you actually being there. You have to think of yourselves as your own personal sales force. And you have to convince others that you have value beyond the value that they're currently employing you for.
Does anybody here know the story of Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla and how they were sort of intertwined? Why does everybody know Edison and nobody knows Tesla? It's because Edison was a great salesperson. They were both great inventors. But Edison sold his ideas, and Tesla sat in a lab and came up with crazy stuff and was the traditional mad scientist. And the difference between being famous through all of history and being a crackpot admired by a few is sales. We sometimes think, especially in the more lofty sort of academic ways that we often get around Black Hat and conferences like it, that the people with the best ideas are the ones that win. Nope. Sorry. Hey, you know, it's one of those sad but true facts of life that you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you can't communicate that, if you can't sell that, you're done.
When you stop selling yourself, your career will die. You will become more and more irrelevant. Others will pass you by. I mean, you could probably see, this is, I've been to every Black Hat. This is like, I guess 13 years at this. I remember it was like 100 people at the hotel's not even there anymore. But if you think about it, I remember meeting people at that conference that are not even in the industry anymore. A lot of the people's skills are irrelevant. You know, they became the last buggy whip maker. They stopped being out there. They got tired. Sales is perpetual. And, you know, you said before when Mike asked the question about, you know, who's your current customer? And you said, but you know what, though? You had the right answer to this question. I mean, who's your potential customer? And that's the answer, is everyone is your potential customer. You're always interviewing for your next position. You're interviewing for every day when you go to work. You're interviewing it through your social networks. You're interviewing here at the conference when you meet people at Black Hat. That impression that they get, just being able to kind of, that interaction that they have with you is going to become memorable at some point in time.
Let me jump in and ask a random question. How many people have ever written a sales letter? Thank you for jumping ahead. Nicely done.
You've seen the talk before,
Yeah,
right?
I actually,
And I'm on the hotel's wireless, so you might be on my.
yeah, yeah.
I trust everybody.
Like what? 10% of you put your hands up. But if I asked you how many of you have a resume, I bet there's nobody in the room that doesn't. Well, what's a resume? It's a brochure for you. It's a sales letter for you, right? If you think about it that way, it becomes a very different tool. Because we were all taught, and Lee said it earlier, we don't live in our parents' world. We don't live in the world that, you come out of college and you send a nicely formatted CV via the mail to a response to an ad in the local newspaper classifieds. A resume is a sales letter. A resume is a sales letter that says, hey, I might be calling on you later. You've all dealt with salespeople at some point if you've walked through this conference. They get your email address when they scan your badge, and then they send you something. Well, that's exactly what you're doing when you're sending a resume.
If you think about, where everybody being your potential customer, I think that, one of the things that people forget is that they go to places or they put themselves in position where they don't have unique skills, where, they want to speak at a security conference, as opposed to if you wanted to become the chief information security officer in the healthcare industry, instead of speaking at a security event, you might want to start gravitating to go to healthcare events. So the idea is that you have to go to places when you're selling yourself, to places where you are the unique one. You go to places where you are the oddity, where you have information that people can't get anywhere else in the room. You become that expert. You think about it, when you have a product need and there is a solution that really will solve your problem, you might be the one that calls the salesperson. I mean, how easy would it be to interview for a position if somebody called you up and said, hey, we have an opening and we think you'd be perfect for it? Not much of an interview process, right? How much different is that than if you just send your resume to some blind website and, you're one of 150 people in the black hole of monster.com or some internal HR function? You think about that. You have to seek out opportunities. You're always out there selling yourself. And you could sell yourself in ways where just by volunteering yourself, getting out there and trying to help others, help people in your current companies solve security problems. Go beyond your job descriptions. Build friends within your organization that become folks that count on you. Think about what people are going to think about you in your job if you become the person that they count on to help them solve security problems. Think about when the next internal promotion comes up and they ask others, who do you think we should give it to? Well, if an executive VP in an organization says, you know what, I don't know much about security, but Patty, she really solves my problems for me. Every time I have something, she's great. She communicates well. Everything's done timely. Why don't we give it to Patty? You think about who your audiences are. You touch your audiences every day. Going the extra mile for people is the way to sell things to people without being overtly selling them. You think about walking into a car dealership. I mean, how many, you can't even get out of your car without getting swarmed, right? You don't want to be that person. You want to sell through knowledge. You want to sell through the fact that people are going to like you. You want to sell through that relationship. You want to build those relationships, and those relationships can be found everywhere. In your job, in industry events, online, you name it.
And ultimately that brings up the next question of marketing. Because sales and marketing go hand in hand.
Does anybody have understanding how marketing differs from sales?
What's the difference?
Nobody? All right, good, we got a customer. Okay. Anybody else? Marketing is the preparation for the sale.
That's good.
Market, market awareness, Carol? Managing perception. I think those are all good answers.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, selling is almost the act and marketing is almost the method, right? I mean, that's how I kind of look at it. I kind of look at, marketing really becomes, marketing might be the bow and the nice wrapping paper on top of the actual package itself. So, you talk about marketing, you have to really talk about branding and building the brand. Companies spend millions and billions of dollars to build that brand.
And ultimately, that's all about one thing. The purpose of marketing is really simple. And you can measure a successful marketing program, in my opinion, as somebody who does a lot of marketing, by one thing. How many leads do you have? Marketing is lead generation. How many leads, how many people out there are aware of what you do and are interested enough to talk to you about it? That's when sales starts. Sales starts when the lead shows up. As Lee says, that's when the act starts. But marketing is the act of creating awareness in all the people who could potentially be interested in you about what you do, about what your product is.
But there, in marketing, there's also a big difference between an unqualified lead, just that
Right.
email that gets sent, and a qualified lead, somebody who can actually have an impact on your career.
So, your high school best friend who's not in this industry is an unqualified lead.
Sure, the chief security officer at a major Fortune 500 company would be a very qualified lead.
Exactly. So, I ask you to think about it. How many people who are your potential customer know of you and know what you do? And I would bet that most of your answers are probably pretty small. You're not out there. And I'm not suggesting that you be one of those guys that hits the news every 2 or 3 years who takes out a billboard in Times Square saying, hire me. You guys have all heard those random stories peppered through the news every couple of years. Somebody does something really random like that. And I'm not suggesting that you go put up a glamorous website for yourself with, pictures of you at play and pictures of all the stuff that you've done. But figure out how to market. Figure out how to reach those people and make them aware of what you do. Obviously, you can do the kind of stuff we do. Speaking, blogging, writing. But maybe you're not that kind of person. Maybe you're the kind of person that goes out to events and markets one-on-one. You have to figure out how to go out and get those people aware of what is your brand, who you are, and what you do.
When you start thinking about businesses marketing, right? You start thinking about, slogans, packaging, just being kind of known for something, and start thinking about all the, the different brands that we get hammered on, with the Super Bowl. I always think, this kind of sounds crazy, and I'll probably get some bad reaction, but that company GoDaddy with their bold Super Bowl ads, they're tasteless, and they're not, but in a very short period of time, that's the brand that's been associated with GoDaddy. That's the type of thing that I equate as their, trashy Super Bowl ad. That's the first thing I would think about, right? So when you think about, when you talk about branding, you have to think about how you want to be perceived. And that perception can be very easy. It could be very easy to talk about branding yourself within the context of your job, within the context of your local community and your peer groups, and in the context of the information security community at large. There's so many different groups that people can volunteer. I think about in New York, we have a very active OWASP chapter, and there's a guy that runs the OWASP community in New York, a guy named Tom Brennan. I just think of him as Mr. OWASP. Everything about OWASP, he's always involved with. And, You know, that just kind of equates. So if I had a question about web application security, he'd probably be the first guy I'm going to call. Because if he doesn't have the answer, he probably knows somebody who's going to get me that answer, and I'm going to be able to kind of interact with him that way. So you start thinking about how you want to be known in your career and being known in your own environment. Do you want to be known as the person who comes early? Do you want to be known as the person who delivers projects on time? Do you want to be known as that the person who's always laughing at meetings, or the person who just talks too much and never listens? You have to think on a general basis how you want to be perceived in your regular work environment, amongst your peers, and in the community at large.
And it doesn't matter if you choose not to decide, you've still made a choice, to paraphrase an old song lyric. You know, you have a brand. Whether you like it or not, you have a brand. It's only the choice of, do you choose to consciously choose what your brand is and to work towards that brand, or do you choose to just let it happen? All right, next thing in managing your you Inc. is the one that nobody likes to talk about. And it's funny because, you know, you get these career talks with people like us, and everybody talks about how to get more income. But very few people would get up here and talk about the other side of it. But if you're running a company, you have a budget. You have a P&L, profit and loss statement. You have a balance sheet. I'm a big fan of the financial guy, Dave Ramsey, and he often says, if you were hired by you Inc., to run finance, if you ran finance for you the way you currently manage money, would you fire you? And I would bet the answer for most of us in the room is yes. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and give you a whole bunch of budget advice. Go read Dave Ramsey or Susie Orman or something. But you don't just get to think about the income. You got to think about the outgo, too. That's part of the P&L for you, Inc.
Well, one of the key reasons that the outcome, or how you budget and manage your life, is important is because if you're under financial duress, you cannot make good decisions. All your decisions will be colored because you have to focus on money as opposed to focusing on things that might be better for you. And you know, Mike and I we talked about that survey. We pulled that data from beforehand. I mean, we found some things, and this will be easy. It'll just be show of hands. We're not going to ask anybody to say anything. So we asked a couple key questions. And one of the questions we asked was, in relationship to other people in IT, do you think that have the same experience that you do, because you are a security professional, how many people believe that they're entitled to earn a bit more money? How many people think that they're entitled to earn a whole bunch more money? So it's a very small percentage right here. So in our survey, 50% of the respondents said that they felt that they were entitled to earn a bit more money. 33% of the respondents said that they were entitled to earn a lot more money. So 83% of the folks that responded to our survey thought that because they were a security professional, they deserved to earn more, just because they did security.
Unfortunately, most companies don't think that these days.
I mean, I don't know any HR functions that think that way now. They used to, but not now. How many people think they're underpaid? Show of hands. How many people think they're overpaid? Okay, a little honesty, right? So our survey said 60% of the information security professionals felt that they were underpaid. 3% thought that they were overpaid. That's about right in this room. So, how many people got a salary increase last year? How many people were happy with their salary increase last year?
Yeah, that's about right.
How many people were disappointed with their salary increase? Very good. 50% of the people in our survey were disappointed in their salary increase, and only 10% were pleasantly surprised. 5-1. So if you could, I could tell you that the things that I saw in that survey made me feel one thing, just the common thread of the data was that there's a perception problem in our market. And whether that perception problem is self-created or it's a poor job of management communication, it's one of those two things. So when you start thinking about compensation, what you really have to think about is how you mark yourself to the market. And when I say mark to market, we heard that a lot in the financial crisis. But when you start thinking about marking to market, right? How are you paid in relationship to others that have the same jobs, that have the same skills, in the same industry, in the same location? You have to find a way to get that data. Feel free to talk to your friends about some of these items. Question?
And what that comes down to is ultimately customer selection. You know, if you're thinking about it as a business, when you start writing a business plan, you start talking about who your target market is and who your ideal customer is. You know, I know for one of my businesses that my ideal customer is the person that really cares about deep technical security. If someone's just looking to check a box, I don't want them as a customer, and I will turn them down. If you're working in if you want to be paid well as a security person, you probably want to work in an organization that cares and puts a whole lot of value towards security, right? You know, and it clears it up when you think about this as a customer relationship, because ultimately some customers are willing to spend a bunch of money on something and some aren't. And if your goal is to sell your product, if you're selling a high price premium product, you know, you're not marketing Ferraris to a low income, you know, to a low income neighborhood. You're marketing Ferraris to rich people. If you want to sell your product, which is you, at a very high price, you market it to people who have a lot of money to spend and who are looking to spend it on that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, when it comes down to it, too, one of the other things that, to expand upon your point, John, is that when you have, I mean, whose fault really is that information security is not valued in your organization? I mean, if that happens to be your situation, you might look at who's ever leading that organization at doing a very poor job of communicating to the people who determine the commitment, the budgets of information security by being able to demonstrate the importance, which goes back to sales. So if you think about that, right, you have to be able, in your job, you should be talking to your management about why security is important. I don't say that, hey, look, if we don't do this, we're going to be on the cover of the New York Times and the building's going to, the hackers are going to come in and we're going to lose our brand and all that other stuff. But you might be able to talk about that significantly and you might get more commitment. But, you know, when you start thinking about marketing your skills, right, you have to start thinking about, like, if I become better quicker, can I get more money? How will getting better help accelerate my earnings?
In business, we call it a forecast, right?
I mean, and the other thing is this: if I don't get better, are my skills worth less? I mean, think about, like, when people were, when I started recruiting in the mid-'90s, if I found somebody who had firewall experience, like checkpoint firewall experience, that was real hot. I mean, people would pay tons of money for that. Now, having firewall experience is like it's expected that if you're a network engineer that you'll know how to deal with firewalls. It's a line item on the job. It's not the job itself. So if you think about that, think about the skills that you're known for today, what the market value of those skills are now, and what the market value of those skills might be in 3 years. Is there going to be more need for those skills, or are there going to be less need for your skills?
And ultimately, you get to make choices about how your customers are going to pay you. part of understanding your own financial situation is understanding how much compensation I need. Do I want to be a high-priced product right now, or will I take a little less while I develop that version 2.0? It's funny. We're a very education-driven industry, as we saw earlier. You know, the 47% want more training, and only 49% want to keep their job. Most people in our industry will take less to develop their product more, because it's a very product development oriented industry. You know, I always use accounting as my example. The rules of accounting haven't changed much in the last 100 years. The rules of information security, you know, if you still knew only what you knew in 2005, you would be completely useless to your employer. You know, you wouldn't know anything about wireless networks. You wouldn't think about mobile devices. You wouldn't know about data leak prevention. I could probably name.
You probably
10
know
other
a lot about PKI.
Yeah, you know a lot about PKI. But think about it. Our industry changes so rapidly. We're actually we're a funny industry, because if you think about where the security holes are, they're always in the new product. Not a whole lot of security holes in the products that that have been developed for 17 years. Actually, there was a great talk here yesterday on the NTLM nonce vulnerability that had been in every version of Windows back to Windows 3.51. How often does that happen? You very rarely hear of a vuln that goes back like 10 versions of a product, because stuff gets worked out. So our industry always lives at the front of the threat vector. It always lives at the newest technology, which means you get obsolete real quick if you don't keep up.
And I think the thing that you have to do is that when you start looking at your skills, going back to that, is thinking about which skills you can leverage so you remain relevant and become more relevant. And those don't have to always be technical skills. A lot of them could be leadership and business skills. So I think it always kind of then comes back to, and this is one of my favorite quotes. You know, I don't even know the guy who said it, but I just think it's a great quote, right? It says, you know, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I think there's some just general examples of talking about how you can negotiate better for yourself. And I mean, I think that the key component in negotiation is that everybody thinks it's an adversarial situation. Like when I deal with people, I'll say, well, what were you earning at your past job? And well, why does your company need to know that? Well, they need to know that because they're going to be making some decisions. So you have to be able to start thinking of negotiation in a way where you're humanizing the discussions, where you're taking a very candid and professional approach to negotiation. You know, you're not going to be surprising. You know, your value of your skills is what your value of your skills are. And I think that what happens is that a lot of people believe that there's these hidden myths in negotiation compensation where the best practices are really honesty. If you know you need a certain amount of money to take a job, you need to let people know that I need that amount of money to take the job. There really shouldn't be any surprises. And if you start thinking about your career goal and the business goal, if money is important to you, you have to figure out what that career goal really pays. Not what you saw on some website, not what, you know, some broad-based website puts out about, oh yeah, if you're a security manager in New York City, you should be earning $200,000. That is completely not the case, but there's a ton of bad data out there. So you have to come with a good understanding of what these jobs pay. And if you know that you want to make $200,000 a year and you pick a career goal that's only going to max out about 125 or 130, you got a problem. You either have to adjust how you're living or you have to adjust your goal. So that goes back to that alignment, right? I mean, I also think this is that depending on where you are in your career, you're going to make different compensation decisions. I think that as a standard rule of thumb is that if you're early in your career, never take a job because of money. Always take a job because of experience, for acceleration, to work with smart people. Later in your career, your goals might change and money might be important. You might want to think about all those decisions that you've made along the way, prepare you for a job where you can command larger compensation. The better your skills, the more leverage you have. But you can never overplay your hand. And I feel like good I can say that in Vegas. You know, there's a lot of poker rooms out here, right? But overplaying your hand means is that you think that you're smarter than you really are. You think that they need you more than you need them. You think you're that much better than option B. You know what? Miscongeniality doesn't look so bad. And you have to understand that is that when you get into one of these discussions about compensation and negotiation, you really need to know kind of where you sit in relationship to others, how badly you want to acquire the experience, and how important that experience is to your ultimate long-term goal.
You didn't mention career terrorism.
Oh, well, I love, one of my favorite statements is career terrorism. You know, how many of you guys hire people or, have people who work for you? You ever like when somebody comes to your office, say, look, you know, if you don't give me $10,000, I'm going to quit my job? And how do you respond to that as manager? You got to love that, right? I'm going to say, get out of here, right? I mean,
enjoy that new job.
But you know what, though? People do that still. In the dot-com days, that was common practice. But you know what? There's a way to go out and do it. And talking to your employer about, maybe you had some life changes. Maybe you can say, hey, look, you know what? I'd really like to remain working here. Everything is great about my job, but I need to earn more money, and I'm hoping you can find a way to get it for me. And you know what? You can make a decision after that. But you have to think about, you have to negotiate like a business person. You know, if I negotiate with a customer and say, you know, you have to give me this, take it or leave it, they're going to say leave it. You have to work with people, and you got to understand that.
All right, the last part of most org charts is R&D. And when we're talking about R&D, we're not talking about it the way most security companies do it. We're thinking more like an Intel or a GE, where there's actually the thought of real investment. You see it on the news that GE allocates $200 million to research and development, which basically means, how do I go out and find new stuff? How do I put new stuff in the pipeline that will be part of the product in 3, 4, 5, 10 years that will continue to make my business evolve?
I mean, if you don't invest in yourself, if you don't reinvest in your career is going to fail. That's going to be your exit strategy. Failure, redundancy, mediocrity. And I think the common thing is this, is that, you know, anytime you make an investment in your career, and the way I define it, a career investment might be anything by, it could be a certification, it could be education, it could be training, it could be something completely off the wall that gives you a common linkage with somebody. It could be golf lessons, it could be wine tasting. Now those might be a little bit more fun than getting a CISSP or a SAN certification. But you know what though? You're also playing to your audience. If you know that your audience likes to golf, maybe that's something you want to do. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody should go out and, you know, become Tiger Woods, but I'm saying is this, is that you have to pick career investments that help augment and help get you to your career goals and figure those things out, what that means for you. And getting back to like some of these standard investments like the CISSP and, you know, all these other like a basic training or, you know, coming to a conference, those are good investments, but they're all safe investments. Think about how many people come here. Think about how many CISSPs there are. They're going to sustain your business. They're not going to grow it. So you got to think about it that way. You have to choose investments that are going to differentiate you from your competitors, not keep you on the same line with them.
Anybody in here ever taken a really weird training just to get a skill that nobody else has? What was it? Human relations. You know, in our industry, that's definitely a differentiator sometimes. AS400 security.
Retro.
Yeah, that's the retro investment. That's awesome.
That's good, though.
No, but that's, I mean, that's about offering something unique to your customer, right? Anybody else?
Anybody do something like, completely wacky? Or how many people have a master's degree here? Okay. How many people have a master's degree in information security? Why did you guys choose to get a master's in information security? Anyone? Like, why that degree? Why that specialization over others? So, question. So, when you were deciding that, did you decide more to focus on information? Why didn't you focus on like more of an MBA type of a skill program as opposed to information security? And that's a great answer. I mean, and that's a great answer. I think that when you start thinking about any of these big education investments, you have to think about, what is the branding of that investment and what other people care and think about that branding, right? I mean, if you went and you start, I think I'm going to be out of order here, but I mean, but if you start thinking about, like, if somebody and I'm not making judgments when I say this, but I want you to think, I'm going to say some things. If you were interviewing for a position and you had one candidate who had a master's degree from the University of Phoenix, and you had another candidate who had a master's degree from any Ivy League school, what would you think of the branding of those two different master's programs? Would you have any preconceived notions when the person walked in the door? If you only had to choose one person to interview, who would you interview? Right? So you have to think about the branding of the investments. The best way you can think about before you make an investment, if I had somebody and I met them who had this investment, what would be my blink reaction to that person? You have to think about that with your career, because you're going to spend money, you're going to spend your time, you're going to spend your effort, and there's going to be sacrifice. So before you go out and plunk down money and plunk down your time, think about the value of that investment to yourself and to people who are going to help you get to where you want to go.
And ultimately, what Lee's saying is that you have to calculate return on investment. You have to calculate your ROI. Now, your return on an investment might be more than financial. You're happier. That's a great return on investment. You followed your passion. You did what you loved. That's pretty freaking cool. It might be that you have, increased career acceleration, opportunities for more things, more access, more respect. These are all intangible returns on the investments that you can make. But you have to think about it.
Sure, and so we're running a little bit low on time, so I'll give you my our three standard rules on career investments, and very simple. You get what you pay for. I mean, that to me is very important. And, anytime you invest in yourself, generally speaking, it's money well spent. Getting better, no matter what it is good. It's always better to get better. Can't go wrong getting better. Can't go wrong getting smarter. And if you don't invest in yourself, don't expect anybody else to. Because corporations have different reasons for investing than you as you do. If they're writing the check, it's because it benefits them. If you're writing the check, it's because it benefits you. And you got to think about that.
All right. Last thing in a corporate structure is the board of directors. CEO always has a board that they are both accountable to, but that provide advice to them. So I ask you, who is your board of directors? We often, the word mentor has been thrown around a lot in our industry in the last couple of months. This is where mentorship comes in. Who do you go to for advice? Who do you go to talk about your career? And your board of directors, you should identify who those people are. Who are you going to talk to the next time you make a career decision? I know who mine are. I have 4 people that I always talk to. And that those people will come from all different parts of your network: peers, people you've worked for in the past, people you work for now, industry experts. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that talk to him about their career decisions before they make it. He's just really good at that kind of stuff.
Well, I think the one thing is this: is you get in my line of work, you get perspective and you get to listen to folks. But I mean, I think that when you start thinking about your board of directors, the thing that are important when you select these people to give you guidance is that they should have the same ethics and values that you have, and they should always have your best interest at heart. They can never have their own hidden agenda, and you have to use your gut to flush that out. But before you start trusting people, make sure they're reading off make sure that they're aligned with how you think.
We have a cheat sheet. It'll be up on the blog later. You can go download this.
But, so, I mean, let's just give you guys some conclusions to walk away from this with, right? I mean, look, we just dealt with 2 years of crazy economics, and depending on who you listen to on CNBC, we don't know if that's behind us or ahead of us. But whatever it is that we should recognize that this economy has had a really eye-opening effect to everyone, and you should all be cognizant of the macroeconomic pictures that you might be facing. I also think this is that certifications are signal theory. We talked about it before. The certifications that you'll get are valuable, but do not rely on them wholeheartedly. If you do, you're making big mistakes. In the future, employers are going to have a lot. The world's getting smaller. Social networks. I was talking to somebody I met out last night. I know him for a while, and he said to me, he said, "You know what? I got a real problem. Someone took a video last night and posted it on YouTube. This guy employs 20 people that work for him. He's on Vegas on a business trip. I'm sure that he's going to deal with that when he gets back." So people are judging you at all time. The other thing I talked to you about is this, is that how many people use LinkedIn? How many people have had like a real big, how many people has LinkedIn had a huge impact on their lives? So the idea of a network and the idea of a meaningful network are 2 different things. So you have to think about building a meaningful and effective network, not just building a network. Your network has to be actionable, it has to be responsive, and it has to be able to get you a result. That's key. Security pros are going to have to be a lot more business savvy in their career. When we do a CISO search for a client, instead of them asking, "Can we have a security person who understands business?" they ask us, "I need a business person who understands security." That's the litmus test now. When you start thinking about your career itself, is that you have to write that career plan. Take some time, write that career plan. Think this out. Think about where you want to go, where you want to get to. You will be less disappointed. If you have a plan, you'll probably act towards that plan. And you're going to have to differentiate yourselves from your peers. Everybody wants the same thing. Security is becoming more and more popular. Competition is heating up. For every good position that we recruit for, everybody's qualified. It's just the degree of qualification and the nuances of the customer who's making the decision.
And just to wrap up, if you look at all the functions on that cheat sheet, try and imagine running a company without one of them. Imagine running a company without finance, or without sales, or without marketing, or without a product. You can't. You can't run your career without it either. Take this and use it. It's If you are not doing all these functions, you are selling yourself short. Period. End of story. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.